Before I get into this video properly, let me ask you what your favorite PlayStation exclusive is and your favorite era of PlayStation. My personal favorite is either the PS1 or the PS3. I'll tell you my favorite exclusive at the end of the video though. If you look at the current sales figures for the current generation of PlayStation exclusives, they're doing incredibly well. However, if you look at the majority of the games, they are primarily behind-the-shoulder action-adventure titles with cinematic presentation style. I do love this style of game, however, it all becomes a bit samey after a while. And this is something Nintendo does a hell of a lot better than Sony does. They have a wide variety of exclusives, even if the majority of them are directed at a younger audience. Xbox, on the other hand, despite having very few exclusives, does have a heavy focus on shooters. It's great for each company to have a niche, so to speak. However, it kind of sucks when the majority of your genre diversity comes via third-party multi-platform games. Now, if you look back at Sony's past, they always had a ton of diversity in their exclusive library from the PS1 through the PS3 era, with a massive shift on the PlayStation 4's library. So let's look at some of the potential ways Sony could expand the diversity in their exclusive lineup. One of the reasons the PS4 was so successful last generation, especially early on, was Sony's dedication to fostering support for indie studios. So far, Sony is doing an okay job at this generation. With the PlayStation 5, we've had Kena Bridge of Spirits in 2021, and in 2022, we had Stray as exclusives on the indie front. In both instances, Stray and Kena were first-time outings for their respective studios. If Sony continues to do this, they'll be known as the console for indie studios, which in turn will increase the diversity of games available on the system. So why would a greater focus on indie games improve the diversity? Part of why indies and AA studios would vastly improve the diversity of games in the PlayStation ecosystem is because they are not beholden to a large number of shareholders. Because they aren't beholden to so many individuals, they don't fall under the too many cooks spoil the broth point of view. Basically, fewer higher-ups can tell the dev team their game must have X, Y, and Z feature. Indies can also focus on whatever genre they would like to. At present, the 2D metroidvania subgenre of platformers is seeing a renaissance because of indie studios like Team Cherry and Moon Studios, with both Hollow Knight and the Ori series.
Alright, Colin, I'm going to have to stop you right there. I need to interject really quick, okay, before I, take up too much time here. This Metroidvania renaissance did not start here just recently. It actually started all the way back in 2004 with Cave Story. Then it slowly built and built and built up over the years like a Trails plotline until it exploded here recently, okay? It started off very slow burn, okay? Very slow burn. Here and there you got a few of these types of games, like you have Dust and Elysian Tale, and you got freaking Shadow Complex in 2009. You see these here and there, not as much as we see now. What really I think started the whole indie Metroidvania seems we see it now is Guacamelee back in 2013. Very early days of the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. That game came out, had enormous amounts of success. Indie studios and fans of this type of game really started to see, hey, we can have some success here if we put a lot of passion into a game like this. And so more and more and more started coming out, and then you have one of the founding fathers of this genre in Koji Igarashi leaving Konami, making his own studio, and starting a Kickstarter for one in 2015. That's what really set this in stone, okay? It put the stamp on it. That's what started it, okay? Cave Story back in 2004, and then what really just set the bomb off was Guacamelee, okay? I had to say this because I know someone in the comments is going to say it, okay? But I wanted to be that guy. Don't worry, Metroidvania fans. I got you, okay? Alright, back to your regularly scheduled program.
In the fighting game space, you have companies like Main 6 with them's Fightin' Herds. You just couldn't find a pony-based fighting game in the AAA development space because it doesn't cater to the casual gaming crowd, instead of focusing on a niche one. Well, it's all well and good to appeal to the broadest audience possible, which in theory means more profitability. Generally speaking, cornering a market is the best approach. Right now, Sony has the cinematic storytelling segment of the market cornered. That's what PlayStation Studios does best. While I may not like the Last of Us games, I can acknowledge they at least do what they do more than competently, even if I find them boring.
That is blasphemous! That is blasphemous!
Two games that are, however, a lot of fun to me are Marvel's Spider-Man and Ratchet Clank Rift Apart. Both titles actually benefited from being rather cinematic. Spider-Man because of the very nature of the superhero genre leading to spectacle being a primary focus, while Ratchet & Clank benefited from elevating what was already there. If you look at interviews with Insomniac Games as far back as Ratchet & Clank's inception on the PS2, you'll see their intention was to make games that felt like playing Pixar or DreamWorks films. While they did a decent job of that on limited hardware, it was the PlayStation 3 era where Insomniac finally started scratching the surface of this with the Ratchet & Clank Future sub-series. Rift Apart was merely the culmination of the original end goal. However, one of the things actively holding back the PlayStation 5 from being the best console of all time is how few niche titles are actually available on the system right now. Since this is the early days for the system, this isn't all that alarming a thing to consider. The first few years of any console's life is typically more about getting as high a market share as possible and getting either the most dedicated of gamers to buy it, or get the casuals looking at it for the next big budget release. If you want a little bit of business theory, there's this idea that products go through stages. There are 5 stages to be precise: introduction, growth, maturity, saturation, and decline. Applying this to gaming consoles, stage 2 is when you start to see more niche games filtering in. However, it's usually during the saturation and decline phases that become more prevalent. Applying that to this channel, the early stages is when you'll see a lot of fighting games coming out even though they're a niche product. They also have a lot of mass market appeal because of the cool factor of being able to pull off slick moves that are incredibly flashy. During this phase, you're going to see a lot less in terms of JRPGs, for example, as they really only have appealed to weebs and to very hardcore gamers. Platformers, on the other hand, appeal to the more hardcore crowd as well. Let's continue with the marketing analogy. The PlayStation 5 has only been on the market for 2 years at this point. As we're currently in its 3rd year of production, that means it's just leaving the introductory phases of its life. For an introduction, I'd say the PS5 has left a hell of an impression. At least on me it has. However, the PS5 is now established and is looking to grow. It's during this stage we'll see Sony make more deals with developers who focus outside of the PlayStation's primary niche of cinematic games. That doesn't necessarily mean it'll happen. However, for the long-term health of not just the PS5 but the PlayStation brand as a whole, Sony does need to diversify for one very obvious reason, which we're about to discuss. The shift towards a more narrative-focused and cinematic style of game happened during the 7th generation of home consoles. This makes a lot of sense because technology was finally catching up with ambition. This further continued in the 8th gen of consoles and is continued into this one. As technology gets more and more powerful, realistic experiences become easier and easier to convey through cutscenes and gameplay. However, if you have your ear to the ground in the gaming industry, you'll notice gamers are getting decidedly burnt out on this particular style of game. That's not to say cinematic games need to die off entirely, far from it. It merely means the gaming landscape is shifting and it's in Sony's best interest to diversify its lineup of games so it doesn't suffer from the law of diminishing returns. If you look at the current gaming landscape, the most popular genre of gaming at the moment is the Battle Royale genre. This includes games like PUBG, Fortnite, and Call of Duty Warzone. This genre combines elements of last man standing, survival, exploration, and scavenging elements. They can either be first or third person shooters. It's not hard to see why this genre is so popular though. A lot of these games feature the high skill ceiling of competitive shooters and incorporate random elements that give the illusion for lower skilled players that they're managing to do something. Sony may actually benefit from bringing back a first-person shooter series from the PS3 days. Why would they benefit though? By finding a middle ground. What is this middle ground though? Well, as I mentioned previously, Sony have an IP they can pivot into the Battle Royale genre rather easily while still maintaining the cinematic storytelling Insomniac games have become known for. That franchise? It just happens to be Resistance. It wouldn't take all that much effort to transition the franchise into the Battle Royale genre with a strong cinematic campaign, but this is something I'll be covering in a future video. So what are your thoughts on the current state of PlayStation? Are you sick of the heavy focus on almost purely cinematic experiences? If so, how would you transition PlayStation to resemble some of its older consoles with more diverse offerings? Comment below, and if you liked the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, 2 of my previous videos should be popping up on screen now. One YouTube thinks you'll like, and my videos on why I think some games are deserving of remasters and remakes. Until next time, keep blazing that trail.